Irene beth o hyd money funny and you can yell Herman Wallace.
What does that mean?
It means bite your tongue in Welsh.
Picture this. It's 1970, and the most important piece of furniture in your living room isn't the lazy boy or even that Harvest Gold couch your wife picked out. It's that wood grain console television set, complete with rabbit ears and a dial that actually clicked when you turned it. Back then, you had three choices: ABC, CBS, and NBC, and that was plenty. Sunday nights meant gathering the whole family around that glowing box, adjusting the antenna until the picture was just right, and settling in for an evening of entertainment that didn't require a PhD in remote control operation. The year 1970 sat right at the crossroads of American culture. Vietnam was winding down, the counterculture was losing steam, and television was stepping up to fill the void. Sometimes as comfort food for the soul, sometimes as a lightning rod for the social changes rumbling throughout the country. These were the shows that ruled the airwaves when television was appointment viewing, not background noise. Number 10. The Doris Day Show. Doris Day's television debut in 1968 had evolved by 1970 into something quite different from where it started. Originally about a widow raising two sons on her father-in-law's ranch, the show had morphed into a San Francisco-based career woman comedy by its third season. Day played Doris Martin, a magazine writer navigating the big city, a surprisingly progressive concept for a woman who'd built her movie career on being America's sweetheart. The controversial truth was that Day herself was reportedly miserable during much of the show's run. Her husband and manager, Martin Melcher, had committed her to the series without her knowledge, and she discovered this financial obligation only after his death in 1968. She was essentially trapped in a contract that paid her well, but kept her from retiring when she wanted to. The show's constant format changes reflected CBS's desperate attempts to find a formula that worked. But Day's heart wasn't really into it. She later called the experience the worst 5 years of my life. What made this show resonate wasn't Day's enthusiasm, it was America's need for wholesome entertainment at increasingly turbulent times. Day represented stability, decency, and optimism when the news was full of protest and body counts. Her perfectly coiffed hair and sunny disposition were comfort food for a nation that was tired of being angry. Number 9. Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color.
The bells are chiming, ding dong dingle, what a merry sound, ding dong.
By 1970, Walt Disney had been dead for 4 years, but his Sunday night anthology series continued to dominate family viewing. The show had gone through several name changes and was now highlighting Disney's back catalog of films, nature documentaries, and made-for-TV movies. Sunday at 7:30 meant Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, and Jiminy Cricket were coming into your living room in living color. Well, assuming you had a color TV set. The series had become appointment viewing for families, but it also served as a brilliant marketing machine for Disney's theme parks and upcoming releases. Each episode was essentially a commercial wrapped in entertainment, though nobody seemed to mind. The format was simple. Walt Disney, through archival footage and careful editing, would introduce the evening's entertainment, often tying it back to Disneyland or Disney World, which had opened in 1971. The controversial truth? The show's producers were quietly editing out any reference to Walt Disney's known associations with anti-communist groups and his cooperation with the House Un-American Activities Committee in the 1940s. By 1970, Disney the Man was being transformed into Disney the Brand, and anything that didn't fit the wholesome image was being scrubbed from history. Ironically, many of the classic Disney films being showcased contained racial stereotypes that would make modern viewers cringe. But in 1970, these were simply accepted as harmless entertainment. The show's success reflected America's desire to retreat into a simpler time, when good and evil were clearly defined, and the worst thing that could happen was Captain Hook threatening Peter Pan. In a world of Vietnam and civil rights protests, Disney offered a refuge where problems could be solved in 90 minutes and everyone lived happily ever after. What show do you think was better than this one? Drop it in the comments and let's settle this. Number 8. Marcus Welby, MD.
Come on in. Lunch, I want you to meet somebody.
Robert Young, who had spent 8 years as the perfect father on Father Knows Best, returned to television as the perfect doctor. Dr. Marcus Welby was everything Americans wanted in a physician. Wise, caring, and always available for house calls. Paired with James Brolin as the young motorcycle-riding Dr. Stephen Kiley, the show offered both old-school bedside manner and new-school medical knowledge. The series premiered in 1969 and quickly became a phenomenon. Young's Welby was the kind of doctor who actually listened to his patients, spent time with them, and treated them as human beings rather than case studies. In an era when the medical profession was becoming increasingly impersonal and specialized, Welby represented everything patients felt they were losing. The controversial truth? The American Medical Association initially tried to get the show canceled, claiming it presented an unrealistic portrayal of medical practice that would give patients false expectations. Real doctors complained that patients were coming to them expecting the kind of personalized attention and miraculous cures that Welby provided weekly. The show's medical advisor, a real physician, eventually quit in frustration, claiming the producers were more interested in drama than medical accuracy. Some episodes featured medical procedures that were either outdated or downright dangerous, but the show's popularity made it untouchable. The series also faced criticism for its handling of controversial medical topics. An episode dealing with homosexuality was so sanitized that gay rights groups protested, while conservative groups complained that the show was promoting deviant lifestyles. Welby was trying to be all things to all people, and sometimes that left everyone unsatisfied. Marcus Welby's popularity revealed America's deep anxiety about modern medicine and the growing disconnect between doctors and patients. In 1970, people still remembered when doctors made house calls and knew your family history. Welby was nostalgic comfort food for viewers who felt lost in an increasingly impersonal medical system. Number 7. The Red Skelton Hour.
Yeah, sit over closer this way. We just had the,
Red Skelton had been making people laugh on television since 1951, and by 1970, he was an institution. His variety show featured his famous characters, Clem Claddlehopper, Freddie the Freeloader, and the Mean Whittle Kid, along with guest stars, musical numbers, and Skelton's signature pantomime routines. At 57, Skelton was old-school vaudeville in an era that was rapidly moving toward more sophisticated comedy. Skelton's comedy was clean, physical, and accessible to viewers of all ages. His characters were innocent and childlike, even when they were getting into trouble. The show followed a traditional variety format: opening monologue, comedy sketches, guest stars, and then a closing number. It was comfort food television that never challenged or offended anyone. The controversial truth, though, behind the scenes, Skelton was reportedly one of the most difficult performers in television. He was a perfectionist who would demand multiple takes for even simple scenes, driving up production costs and frustrating cast and crew. His contract gave him unprecedented creative control, including the right to fire writers and directors at will. Several writers quit the show, claiming Skelton would rewrite their material and then take credit for the improvements. The show was also becoming increasingly expensive to produce. Skelton insisted on elaborate sets, costumes, and effects for his sketches, often spending more on a single comedy bit than other shows spent on entire episodes. CBS executives were growing tired of his demands and declining ratings, but Skelton's contract made him virtually untouchable. More controversially, Skelton was a vocal supporter of the Vietnam War, at a time when many entertainers were speaking out against it. He regularly performed for troops and included patriotic segments in his show, which endeared him to conservative viewers but alienated younger audiences who were turning against the war. Red Skelton represented the last gasp of old-fashioned variety television. His humor was rooted in vaudeville in the Depression era, when entertainment was expected to be wholesome and uplifting. By 1970, The world was getting more complicated, but Skelton's audience wasn't ready for comedy that reflected that complexity. Number 6, here's Lucy.
Hey, how about you calling Ralph for your back alimony?
I already did, and he gave me his usual sob story.
Lucille Ball had been the queen of television comedy for nearly 2 decades, but by 1970, her latest incarnation was showing signs of wear. Here's Lucy featured Ball as Lucy Carter, a widow working as a secretary for her brother-in-law Harry, Gale Gordon. The show was essentially a retread of her earlier successes, with Ball getting into increasingly elaborate physical comedy situations. The series had launched in 1968 after Ball's divorce from Desi Arnaz and the end of The Lucy Show. This new version featured Ball's real-life children, Lucy Arnaz and Desi Arnaz Jr., as her fictional children, adding a meta-textual element that audiences found charming. The show's format was familiar. Lucy would get an idea, chaos would ensue, and somehow everything would work out by the end of the episode. But the controversial truth was Ball was 59 years old in 1970 and struggling to maintain the physical comedy that had made her famous. The elaborate pratfalls and slapstick routines that had seemed effortless in the 1950s were becoming increasingly difficult and dangerous. Ball suffered several injuries during filming, including a broken rib from a comedy bit involving a runaway hospital bed. The show's writers were running out of fresh ideas, recycling plots from I Love Lucy and The Lucy Show with minor variations. Behind the scenes, Ball was reportedly unhappy with the show's direction and the pressure to maintain her image as America's favorite funny lady. Her real-life persona was much more serious and business-minded than her television character, and the constant expectation to be Lucy was taking its toll. She was one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, running Desilu Productions and making major business decisions, but audiences only wanted to see her as the scatterbrained housewife. The show also faced criticism for its portrayal of women. While Ball was pioneering female-led television, her character was often portrayed as incompetent and dependent on male authority figures. Feminist critics argued that Lucy Carter was a step backward from the more independent characters Ball had played in her earlier films. If this list has you yelling at your screen already, hit that like button and share it with someone who grew up watching these classics as well. Number 5, Family Affair.
Did you know that Jab's horse isn't the same horse that he uses in the movies?
No, I didn't know that.
Family Affair was comfort food television at its finest. A confirmed bachelor suddenly raising 3 orphaned children with the help of his devoted manservant. Brian Keith played Bill Davis, a successful engineer whose carefree lifestyle was turned upside down when he inherited custody of his brother's children. Sebastian Cabot played Mr. French, the English gentleman's gentleman, who became the show's real heart and soul. The show's appeal was its depiction of an unconventional family that somehow worked perfectly. Bill Davis was the cool uncle who became a father figure, while Mr. French provided the maternal nurturing the children needed. The kids themselves were precocious, but not obnoxious. Teenager Sissy, Kathy Garver, and the twins Jody and Buffy, Johnny Whitaker and Anissa Jones, complete with Buffy's beloved doll, Mrs. Beasley. The controversial truth was the show's behind-the-scenes reality was far darker than its sunny surface suggested. Anissa Jones, who played the angelic Buffy, was reportedly struggling with the pressures of child stardom. Her parents were fighting over her earnings, and she was showing signs of rebellion against her wholesome image. By 1970, the 12-year-old was already experimenting with drugs and alcohol, desperate to escape the childish character that had made her famous. Sebastian Cabot, meanwhile, was dealing with his own demons. The distinguished actor was battling alcoholism and weight problems, sometimes showing up to the set visibly intoxicated. The show's producers had to carefully schedule his scenes around his drinking, and several episodes had to be rewritten to minimize his dialogue when he was unable to perform. The show also faced criticism for its portrayal of Mr. French as a servant figure. Some viewers saw uncomfortable parallels to old plantation stereotypes, despite Cabot being white and British. The character's devotion to the Davis family, while touching, reinforced traditional class structures that were being questioned and the social upheaval of the early 1970s. Family Affair represented America's fantasy of the perfect, unconventional family. In an era of changing family structures and social norms, the show offered reassurance that love and commitment could overcome any obstacle. The tragedy was that the real families behind the cameras were often struggling with the very problems the show pretended didn't exist. Number 4. Mayberry RFD. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, CBS wasn't ready to let go of Mayberry. Mayberry RFD continued the saga of America's most famous small town, this time focusing on Sam Jones, Ken Berry, a widowed farmer raising his young son Mike, Buddy Foster. The show retained several beloved characters from the original series, including Goober, George Lindsay, Emmett, Paul Hartman, and Aunt Bee, Frances Bavier. The series was essentially the Andy Griffith Show without Andy Griffith, and that was both its strength and its weakness. Mayberry remained the same idealized small town where problems were simple and solutions were always rooted in common sense and human decency. Sam Jones was a gentler, more domestic version of Andy Taylor, more concerned with PTA meetings and school plays and sheriff's duties. The controversial truth was the show was canceled in 1971, not because of poor ratings, it was still a top 10 hit, but because of CBS's infamous rural purge. Network executives decided that shows appealing to older rural audiences were less valuable to advertisers than programs that attracted younger urban viewers. Mayberry RFD was making money, but it wasn't making the right kind of money for the demographic advertisers wanted to reach. Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee, was reportedly miserable during the show's run. She had hoped to retire after the Andy Griffith Show, but was contractually obligated to continue. Bavier clashed with producers over her character's direction and was often difficult on set. She felt typecast and resented being forever associated with the maternal figure she had created. The show also faced subtle criticism for its all-white cast and its idealized portrayal of small-town America. By 1970, the civil rights movement had exposed the darker realities of many small southern towns. But Mayberry remained a fantasy land where racial tensions simply didn't exist. Some critics argued that the show's popularity represented a nostalgic retreat from the complex realities of modern America. Mayberry RFD was comfort food for viewers who longed for a simpler time that may have never actually existed. In an era of Vietnam protests and urban riots, Mayberry offered a refuge where the biggest crisis might be organizing the church social or helping a neighbor fix his fence. The show's eventual cancellation marked the end of an era in television when rural wholesomeness gave way to urban sophistication. Number 3, Bonanza.
What chance you gonna have to use an FA out here in the West?
What I always say is, older brother,
For 14 seasons, the Cartwright family ruled the Ponderosa and Sunday night television. By 1970, Bonanza was showing its age, but it remained one of television's most reliable hits. Lorne Greene's Ben Cartwright was the patriarch of the most famous family in the West, guiding his sons, Adam, Pernell Roberts, Hoss, Dan Blocker, and little Joe, Michael Landon, through adventures that always ended with the moral lessons and family solidarity. The show had evolved considerably from its 1959 debut. What started as a traditional Western had become more of a family drama set against a frontier backdrop. The Ponderosa was less a working ranch than a stage for exploring contemporary social issues through the lens of the Old West. Episodes dealt with prejudice, environmental conservation, and social justice, heavy topics wrapped in the comfortable package of a horse opera. The controversial truth was Pernell Roberts, who played eldest son Adam, had been fighting with producers for years over the show's direction and its character's development. By 1970, he was openly disparaging the series in interviews, calling it junk television, and complaining that the scripts were repetitive and the characters one-dimensional. Roberts felt trapped in a contract that paid him well but offered no creative satisfaction. His constant complaints and demands for script changes created tension on set that affected the entire cast. More explosively, there were rumors of serious friction between the show's stars. Michael Landon, who played Little Joe, was reportedly difficult to work with, often rewriting scenes to give himself more screen time and better dialogue. Dan Blocker, or Hoss, was said to be frustrated with his character's portrayal as comic relief rather than a fully developed person. The family harmony viewers saw on screen was increasingly at odds with the professional tensions behind the cameras. The show was also struggling with changing social attitudes toward violence. Bonanza had always featured gunfights and frontier justice, but by 1970, television violence was under scrutiny from parent groups and government regulators. The series tried to reduce its body count and emphasize moral lessons over action sequences, but this left some longtime viewers feeling the show had lost its edge. Bonanza represented America's idealized vision of its frontier past. In an era when traditional authority figures were under attack, Ben Cartwright remained a patriarch whose wisdom was never questioned. The show offered moral certainty in uncertain times, but that certainty was becoming harder to maintain as American society grew more complex. Number 2, Gunsmoke. After 16 years on the air, Gunsmoke was television's longest-running Western and still one of its most popular shows. James Arness's Marshal Matt Dillon continued to keep the peace in Dodge City with the help of his deputy Festus, Ken Curtis, Doc Adams, Milburn Stone, and Miss Kitty, Amanda Blake. The show had survived the transition from radio to television, from half-hour to hour-long format, and from black and white to color. By 1970, Gunsmoke was more than a television show. It was an institution. The series had weathered cast changes, format shifts, and changing audience taste while maintaining its essential character. Matt Dillon remained the strong, silent lawman who preferred to talk problems through rather than shoot first and ask questions later. The show's Dodge City was a community where people knew each other and looked out for one another, even when they disagreed. The controversial truth? The show's longevity masked serious behind-the-scenes problems. James Arness was reportedly growing tired of the role that had made him famous, but also typecast him. He'd been playing Matt Dillon for nearly 2 decades and was frustrated by his inability to get other roles. The physical demands of the Western format were also taking their toll on the 47-year-old actor, who had been injured multiple times during action sequences. More controversially, the show was facing criticism for its portrayal of women and minorities. Miss Kitty, while a strong female character for her time, was still essentially defined by her relationship to Matt Dillon. The show's few African American and Native American characters were often stereotypical, and by 1970, civil rights groups were pressuring the networks to improve representation in their programming. The series was also dealing with the reality that Westerns were falling out of favor with younger viewers. The genre that had dominated television in the 50s and early 60s was increasingly seen as old-fashioned and irrelevant. Gunsmoke was one of the last Western series still drawing large audiences, but even its ratings were beginning to decline among the demographic advertisers most wanted to reach. Perhaps most damaging were persistent rumors about the relationship between James Arness and Amanda Blake. Industry insiders claimed the two actors could barely stand each other, and their on-screen chemistry was purely professional. Blake was reportedly frustrated with her character's limited development and was seeking opportunities outside the series. Gunsmoke represented the last hurrah of the television Western. In a rapidly changing America, Matt Dillon embodied old-fashioned values of justice, integrity, and moral certainty. The show's continued popularity suggested that many viewers weren't ready to give up on the fantasy of the noble lawman who always knew right from wrong. So, what show do you think was better than this one? Drop it in the comments and let's settle this. At number 1, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
How do you know when we're cured?
Well, it's easy.
And here it is, the number 1 show of 1970, the comedy phenomenon that changed television forever. Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was unlike anything that had ever been on television. Hosted by Dan Rowan and Dick Martin, The show was a rapid-fire mix of sketches, one-liners, political satire, and psychedelic visuals that captured the chaotic spirit of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Laugh-In made stars out of unknowns like Goldie Hawn, Lily Tomlin, and Ruth Buzzy, while creating catchphrases that entered the national vocabulary. Sakatumi, very interesting, and you bet your sweet bippy. The show's format was revolutionary. Short, punchy segments that moved at breakneck speed, leaving viewers no time to get bored. It was television for the MTV generation, except MTV wouldn't exist for another decade. The series premiered in 1968 and immediately became a cultural phenomenon. By 1970, it was the most watched show on television, attracting audiences that range from teenagers to grandparents. The show's political humor was edgy but not mean-spirited, taking shots at both Democrats and Republicans while celebrating the absurdity of American culture. The controversial truth? Laugh-In was almost canceled after its first season. NBC executives were nervous about the show's political content and worried if it was too radical for mainstream audiences. The show's salvation came from an unexpected source: President Richard Nixon himself. Nixon's famous "Sock it to me" cameo appearance during the 1968 election campaign legitimized the series and proved that even the most powerful politicians were willing to laugh at themselves, or at least appear to. Behind the scenes, the show was a pressure cooker of creative tensions. Producer George Schlatter ruled the series with an iron fist, demanding perfection from writers and performers while maintaining the breakneck production schedule that gave the show its energy. Many cast members burned out quickly under the pressure, and turnover was constant. Goldie Hawn left after 2 seasons, exhausted by the demands of live television and eager to pursue her movie career. More controversially, several Laugh-In writers and performers were blacklisted during the McCarthy era and were just beginning to work again in television. The show became a refuge for comedic talent that had been shut out of the entertainment industry for their political beliefs. This gave Laugh-In a subtle but persistent anti-establishment edge that conservative critics found troubling. The show also faced criticism for its treatment of women. While it made stars of several female performers, many of the female roles were based on sexual stereotypes: the dumb blonde, the spinster librarian, the man-hungry predator. Feminist critics argued that the show's humor often came at the expense of women, even as it provided them with unprecedented opportunities in television comedy. Perhaps most significantly, Laugh-In was struggling with its own success by 1970. The show that had seemed fresh and revolutionary just 2 years earlier was already showing signs of formula and repetition. The rapid-fire format that had seemed so innovative was becoming predictable, and some critics argued that the show was more style than substance. Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In captured the schizophrenic nature of American culture in 1970. The country was simultaneously embracing change and clinging to tradition, laughing at authority while respecting it, and celebrating youth while honoring age. The show's success proved that Americans were ready for comedy that reflected the complexity and contradictions of their society, even if they weren't entirely sure what to make of it. Coming up in Part 2, the shocking cancellations that nobody saw coming, the behind-the-scenes feuds that nearly destroyed television's biggest hits, and the one show that changed everything, but almost never made it to air. You won't believe which beloved series was saved by a last-minute phone call from the White House. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in this nostalgia trip. We're just getting started. And if one of these shows was your weekly favorite, tell us what made it special. Drop a comment, and let's take this trip down memory lane together.